Hi and welcome to the sew along video for Lydia's winter sweater. We're going to sew this garment today on an overlocker, so when you're ready set up your overlocker with 4 spools of thread that match the main colour of your garment. In addition to this, make sure your overlocker is set to a 6mm width, which is 1/4 inch. To sew this garment, we're not cutting off any extra fabric with our overlocker blade. We're simply going to match the raw edges of our seams and stitch at that 6mm width. The overlocker blade is just there to trim off any extra fraying or to trim off the threads from previous overlocking. So when you're ready, take the main pieces of your garment, the front and back, and we'll get started. So the first garment seam we're going to sew are the shoulders. So take the back garment piece and place it right side up, and take the front garment piece and place it right side down. We're going to overlock from the drop sleeve through to the neck edge. So when you're ready, place the raw edges together. So I'm starting here, and we're going to present this to our overlocker and start overlocking. Now as you go up the side, you're going to see a notch on these pieces, so that's to make sure our garment sits in the correct place. So make sure those notches match. Overlock through, then rematch the garment at the neck edge. And trim some threads. Now come to the other side of the neckline. Now this neckline is wide. It's been designed as a wide neck come drop shoulder, so it can be worn off the shoulder. But we'll talk more about that when we get on to the neckband part. So match the other neck edge there. Overlock a little way to secure. Find the notches. Match the notches. Overlock up to the notches, find the lower edge of that arm opening. Alright, so now we are going to sew in the lower sleeve piece. Now these have been pattern made in the same fabric as your garment. You can cut them in ribbing if you prefer. You might need to make some minor pattern alterations. That depends on the fit of the garment once you've sewn a test garment. So open the piece you've just sewn so it's right side up, and take the lower sleeve piece and place it right side down, so we've got right sides together. Match one of the edges, which is the curved underarm seam, and just overlock a short way to secure that. Now this piece is designed to stretch. There's designed to have fullness at the upper body and tight fitting around the lower arms. So once you've secured the edge, you'll see halfway up the piece there's a notch. Now that notch there needs to match with the seam we've just sewn at the shoulder. So hold that into position, and then what we're going to do is just distribute that ease evenly over the piece and start overlocking. Overlock until you get just past that notch, which is the shoulder point, making sure that notch sits on that shoulder point. Reposition your work and distribute the ease on the other side. Now depending on the stretch of your fabric, this might be really easy or really hard to do. It's not recommended to sew this garment in a sweatshirting, but if you decide to do the body in a sweatshirting, you could do the lower sleeve in a rib. Okay, so this is exactly what we're looking for. We want some gathering on the sleeve here. So once you've finished this side, go ahead and repeat the process for the other side. when you pass this position here, which is the shoulder, that seam needs to sit towards the back of the garment. Okay, so when you're ready, it's an easy time now to overlock the lower sleeve hem edge. I'm going to assume you don't have a cover seamer. If you do, you can skip this step. Now we're going to fold our garment right sides together, starting at the sleeve area. So match the lower edge like this. You'll see a notch here. Now that will show us the turn position for the hem. So when we overlock, we need to overlock and make sure that that notch is still visible. Now there is an angle to sew here. You do need to sew that angle. Make sure the sleeve seam here sits exactly on top of each other. Now as you come to the underarm area, you'll see notches. They need to match, and the same thing as before, those notches are there to make sure our garment is sitting in the correct position. You'll see another notch to match down the side seam. And when you've finished this side, repeat for the other side. The next step in our process is the waistband. The main thing you need to be aware of is the stretch needs to go this way. So if you're using ribbing, the ribs will sit up and down and the stretch will run this way. So take your waistband and place it right sides together and overlock this short edge. Take the waistband and fold it back on itself so that the wrong sides are together. So we're going to overlock the waistband to our garment, and this seam here is going to sit on the left hand side of the garment as we wear it. Some people like to put the seam in the centre back. I personally like to put it on the left hand side. So match the raw edges, and as you look across the top of the waistband you'll see some notches. So this is our left seam. The single notch shows us the centre front of our garment. The next notch will show us the side seam again, and the two notches together show us where the centre back of our garment is. So it's just a matter now of matching this right sides together to our garment. Now to make it easier on myself, I'm going to use pins, but here is my garment, wrong side out. And I'm going to find my waistband and place that single notch to the centre front, and I'm going to secure it with a pin. I'm going to find the left side seam and match that seam we sewed on the waistband to the seam at the left side. And you notice here that my waistband's on the inside of my garment. You can sew it whichever way you prefer. You can make it on the outside if you prefer. I just like this way. So find the double notches and make sure all three of those raw edges are together, and pin that into position. And I like to pin within the seam allowance just in case my pins cause any laddering or runs in my fabric. And then mark the next notch to the right side seam. Now if you're not sure about sewing this, you could always plain sew it with a tacking stitch on your plain machine and try it on. You may need to cut the waistband wider or smaller to suit. So the waistband is designed to stretch, so you'll have a shorter waistband than the garment itself. So when you're ready, present this to your machine. And I'm going to start my sewing just short of the left side seam. And make sure you take the pins out when you sew, or you will smash needles. And as I stitch this, I'm just going to make sure the overlocker cuts off all these extra threads. So I've just overlocked a short way to hold the seam in place, and I'm now going to gently distribute that fullness and start stitching. So we're almost finished now. We're going to work on the neckband. So just like we did the waistband, take your neckband piece, place it right sides together and overlock the short edge. Now fold this waistband so that the seams are sitting on top of each other and the right side is outside. Now if you're uncomfortable with sewing a neckband, just go ahead and put a tacking stitch with your plain sewer on that. It will just help you when the three layers are being sewn together, just help you a little bit. So the seam here represents our centre back neck. There's a notch directly opposite it which represents our centre front neck, and there are notches in between, and they are going to show us where the shoulder seams sit. Where is my little notch? There it is. So I'm just going to put pins in position there just so I can recognise it a bit easier when I'm sewing. And when you're ready, overlock into position. So this next step's entirely up to you. I'm going to edge stitch my collar down. So what that means is the neckband is going to be stitched on the body side with the bulk of that neckband facing towards the body, just because I like the look of it. Now you don't have to do this. What I am going to do is Make sure my stitch length is longer than normal, and I'm just going to sew with an edge stitch around my neckband. Now if you do this, make sure there's a ball needle in here. Now the other thing is with these collars, neckbands, just remember that they are very much fabric dependent, so if your fabric is really stretchy you might need to adjust the length, or if it's firmer the same thing applies. But this is why sewing a test garment is so important. Or what you could do if you have some spare fabric is just tack stitch on your neckband, try the garment on, and if you like it, overlock it, and if you don't, you can just cut another one. And just bear in mind, overlocking is very difficult to unpick. So when you've finished, I suggest you try this garment on, and the next step is to stitch in the sleeve hem. So what we're going to do is, there was a notch here, you should be able to see it through your overlocking, and that notch is at 1.5 centimeters, which is 9/16 of an inch, and that just shows us the position for that sleeve hem. Now bear in mind that these are oversized, and the reason they're oversized is so you can have that bulky look around the elbow area. So when you've turned that up, go to your machine and stitch in your sleeve hem area. I'm going to stitch mine directly through the overlocking, and I like to stitch mine from the wrong side, but you can stitch it from the right side if you find it easier. And now, because I want to mimic the look of a cover seamer, I'm going to sew another row of stitching. And what I like to do is sew that row of stitching from the right side of my garment. So I'm turning my garment inside out, it's a little bit easier. And I'm going to sew a line of edge stitch, a top stitching parallel to my first row of stitching. And repeat that for the other sleeve. Now bear in mind when you do this, there is no give stitching this the way it is, so you might get some snapping, which means those threads may break. The seam may break when it's put under pressure, so that's why sometimes a cover stitcher comes in handy for these jobs. The main thing to be aware of is that you do put a ball needle into your machine, because a regular needle will cut the yarns that make up your fabric, and that could cause a ladder similar to a run in your pantyhose. So we've got to be very careful to avoid that in knit fabrics. We don't want to ruin our fabric just because we didn't put a ball needle into our machine. So I'm turning my garment inside out and sewing a second row of stitches parallel to the first. And then just go through and do some quality control work, trim off any stray threads. So congratulations, you've got to the end of this garment. Thank you for joining me with this sew along, and I look forward to you joining me with my next sew along soon.